Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're doing something a bit different, focusing on just one source, but it's pretty explosive. It's a video transcript from Counselor Lisa Robinson, and it details this really intense situation she describes in Canadian municipal politics, specifically around Pickering.
That's right. It's quite a document.
So our mission today really is to unpack her main argument. She's basically making this case that there's a direct line connecting the kind of language politicians use, this dehumanizing rhetoric, to actual real-world threats and potentially violence.
Yeah, she uses her local events as a kind of case study for how political speech, specifically the language used, can allegedly incite harm.
And the thing that just jumps out right away, it kind of sets the whole tone, is this detail about an alleged death threat and how the mayor apparently responded. It's shocking, frankly.
It is. And we should be clear up front. This source presents a very strong, very specific point of view based on Counselor Robinson's experiences and interpretations. Our job here is just to synthesize her argument as presented in the material. We're looking at her claims, severe allegations about threats, murder, sexual assault mentioned, and how she connects them to leadership responses, or lack thereof. We're not endorsing the claims, just laying out what the source says about how language is supposedly working here.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics. The flashpoint incident that she uses to frame this. What was the actual threat alleged in the source?
Well, the source states that a counselor allegedly threatened to kill a man, kill his wife, and also have her sexually assaulted, all if this man decided to run in the next municipal election.
That's incredibly extreme. Just lays the groundwork right there.
Exactly. And it's against that backdrop that the source focuses on a comment allegedly made by Mayor Kevin Ash. It was apparently on Counselor Robinson's own Facebook post discussing this situation.
And the comment was?
Quote, Counselor Lisa Robinson, the arsonist whose house is on fire.
Okay, the arsonist whose house is on fire. Now, obviously that's a sharp political comment, maybe nasty. But why does Robinson, in the source, argue this is more than just, political fighting? Why is it incitement?
Well, her interpretation, as laid out in the source, is that it's way beyond just a jab. She calls it reckless and dangerous.
Okay.
She argues it does two things. First, it's victim blaming. By calling her the arsonist, the implication, in her view, is that if something bad does happen to her, well, she kind of brought it on herself.
Right, she started the fire, so to speak.
Exactly. But second, and this is really the core of her incitement argument, she claims that this kind of comment from the mayor, especially given the context of actual death and rape threats floating around, it effectively puts a target on my back.
How so?
It signals, she argues, to anyone who might want to harm her that the leadership won't stand up for her, that they might even, find it amusing or deserved. It removes a layer of protection.
And this connects to what the mayor didn't say, right? She emphasizes his silence, too.
Very much so. She stresses that he never condemned the death threats or the threats of rape right there on the same post, where he apparently made that arsonist comment.
So the lack of condemnation is as significant as the comment itself, in her view.
Yes, the source presents it that way. That failing to clearly denounce such extreme threats, especially threats of sexual violence, by a leader in a public space, well, it's seen as implicitly condoning or normalizing them. It makes the environment more dangerous for the target.
Okay, so this isn't just about one Facebook comment then. The source connects this to a wider pattern she alleges.
That's right. She links this current event back to previous issues she claims she raised with the mayor, concerns that she says were ignored.
What kind of previous issues?
The source details her sharing experiences involving violent threats against her personally, sexual harassment, psychological harassment, and ongoing intimidation, apparently from a male council member.
Wow. So she's saying she reported all this previously.
That's the claim in the source, yes. That she shared these personal experiences with the mayor, seeking support or action.
And the contrast she's drawing is, he was silent then, when she needed help with those threats, but now he mocks me publicly when she's raising alarm about this new community-level threat.
Precisely. That alleged contrast silence, then, public mockery now, is absolutely key to her framing of the situation and, likely, her reasons for making this transcript public. It paints a picture of consistent disregard, according to her account.
And this alleged disregard, she argues, fosters a certain kind of environment on the council, a hostile one.
Yes, she connects the leadership's alleged behavior directly to the overall climate. And she claims this climate is maintained partly through language, through specific labels used against her and residents who support her.
What kind of labels are we talking about?
The source lists quite a few highly charged terms. Racist, homophobic, transphobic, Nazis, alt-right, nutcases. She alleges these are systematically used to smear her and her allies in Pickering.
Yeah, those are definitely terms meant to dehumanize, not debate.
That's exactly her point. And she gives a specific example, what she calls a propaganda video made about a town hall meeting.
Okay.
She claims this video used those kinds of hateful names to describe the people attending, essentially painting targets on their backs, while she says deliberately editing out footage of their friends and families who are also there.
So the argument is that the local government isn't just disagreeing, they're actively creating like an enemy image for their opponents.
That's the core allegation regarding the local dynamics, yes. Creating a climate where hate towards political opponents is, in a way, sanctioned.
Okay, now let's zoom out a bit, because the source doesn't just keep this focused on Pickering, does it? She uses this local situation as a sort of launch pad to talk about a much bigger issue.
Right, she argues this isn't unique to her town. She sees the same patterns of rhetoric and division happening, as she puts it, across the Western world, particularly over the last 5 years or so.
How does she make that connection? What's the bridge?
It's the consistency of the language, she argues. The immediate resort to labeling dissenters with extreme terms, portraying them as enemies rather than just people with different opinions. She sees this happening at all levels.
And she actually gives an example involving the Canadian Prime Minister, right, during the COVID era.
Yes, she quotes him allegedly asking something like, "How long will we tolerate these people so extremist?"
And her interpretation of that language is,
Quite stark. She argues it fundamentally changes the relationship between the government and the governed. People who disagree stop being citizens with rights and become a problem to be tolerated.
a problem to be endured rather than engaged with.
Exactly. And she claims this shift paves the way for hostility because problems often need to be, well, dealt with or removed.
And she ties this governmental language to the media, too.
Directly. She specifically calls out government-funded media outlets claiming they systematically join in this labeling.
How so?
She argues they always reach for the most inflammatory labels. Dangerous fascists, white supremacists, Nazis, far-right extremists, whenever describing people with differing views. Never just,
My neighbor Bob, who disagrees, or people with another perspective.
right, never just fellow citizens, always, according to the source, framed as enemies.
Okay, so this brings us right to the core thesis of her entire argument, doesn't it? If political leaders and media constantly use this kind of dehumanizing language day after day, what does the source say is the inevitable result?
Violence, plain and simple. The source is uncompromising on this. The claim is that this constant drumbeat of defining political opponents as evil, as monsters, makes physical violence against them seem like a predictable, even logical outcome for some people who absorb that message.
It sort of gives permission, in a way.
That's the idea of sanctioned hostility she's putting forward, that the rhetoric implicitly legitimizes acting out against the targeted group.
And to really hammer this point home, she uses a very dramatic and tragic example. She mentions someone named Charlie Kirk.
Yes, the source reports the claim that Charlie Kirk has been murdered and attributes this alleged act directly to the climate created by politicians and media calling people like him dangerous. They're evil Nazis.
Now, we need to add a really important clarification here, don't we?
Absolutely crucial. While the source uses this alleged event involving Charlie Kirk as a dire warning, we have to state clearly, Charlie Kirk, the American political commentator, is alive and very public.
So the information in the source material on that specific point appears to be incorrect.
It appears so. Whether it's based on misinformation, a misunderstanding, or perhaps using a hypothetical scenario for effect, the factual premise of that specific example in the source is inaccurate. However, it does powerfully illustrate the intensity of the source's warning. Even using a factually flawed example shows how high Councillor Robinson perceives the stakes to be. The fear of such an outcome is presented as very real, driven by the rhetoric she's describing.
Right. So regardless of the accuracy of that specific name and event, the underlying warning remains the same. This language, she claims, leads down a very dark path.
Precisely. And this leads to her conclusion about responsibility. Who is accountable if violence does occur?
And her answer is?
Politicians and media outlets who consistently use dehumanizing language. The source states they have blood on their hands.
Even if they don't pull the trigger themselves.
Exactly. They don't fire the gun, she argues, but they create the climate where pulling the trigger becomes conceivable, maybe even encouraged, for someone else.
She using that really vivid analogy, too,
Yeah.
about gasoline.
Yeah, comparing them to people who soak the ground in gasoline and then act surprised when it explodes. It's a powerful image about creating dangerous conditions.
It really sums up her plea, doesn't it? That words aren't just words.
No, her argument is that words build culture, words have consequences. And therefore, the source demands that we hold leaders accountable and push for those who aim to unite, not constantly divide people into us and monsters.
So, let's bring this home. What does this deep dive into Counselor Robinson's testimony mean for you, listening right now?
Well, I think it really forces you to grapple with the potential weight and danger of political language, right? Even seemingly local squabbles, when they involve this kind of alleged rhetoric and response, can point to much bigger, more dangerous
It
dynamics.
challenges the idea that it's just talk.
Exactly. The source argues that when officials allegedly choose mockery over condemnation, incitement over safety, they're not passive bystanders, they're actively shaping a potentially violent climate.
So the main takeaway from her perspective is this urgent need for a shift, a change in how we conduct political discourse.
Yes, fundamentally. The picture painted in the source is one where disagreement is actively being channeled toward intimidation, smears, and ultimately violence. The demand is for a return to a culture where you can disagree strongly without fearing for your safety or being labeled an enemy of the state.
And that leaves us with that final, pretty chilling thought from the source to consider. She concludes that if this climate isn't changed, we'll see more blood, and it won't be an accident, but a predictable outcome of words that kill.
It really puts a question back to all of us, doesn't it?
Yeah. What responsibility do we have as people who consume news, who participate in discussions online or offline, to push back against rhetoric that doesn't just disagree, but dehumanizes, that labels fellow citizens as monsters? That's the really crucial question this material forces us to confront.
A very important question indeed.
Okay, that wraps up our deep dive for today, focusing on this specific, powerful source. Thanks for joining us. We definitely encourage you to think more about these complex issues of political accountability, media influence, and the real-world impact of language. Until next time.